Donald Trump made a "my lips are sealed" gesture outside his civil fraud trial today, but he was anything but tight-lipped on the stand.
Extraordinary tension inside that courtroom, with Donald Trump really pushing and pushing and pushing the judge.
Trump sure looked ready for a fight as he glared at the camera. He clashed with Judge Arthur Engoron from the moment he took the stand, giving long speeches instead of yes and no answers. "This is a very, very unfair trial. Very," Trump complained. "Control your client," the judge told Trump's attorneys. "If you can't, I will." He even snapped at lawyer Alina Habba, telling her to sit down when she insisted maybe he should listen to Trump's long-winded rants. She hit back outside the courthouse.
I was told to sit down today. I was yelled at, and I've had a judge who is unhinged slamming a table. Let me be very clear. I don't tolerate that in my life.
Look closely at his body language in that moment. His hands barely move, yet the words keep pouring out nonstop. That is not the posture of someone completely in control. It looks more like a man falling back on a performance he has rehearsed for decades, only now he is standing in a room that no longer rewards the act. And here is the part nobody needed to say aloud, because every attorney in that courtroom already understood it. Donald Trump was not fighting to avoid responsibility that day. That question had largely been decided months earlier in a written ruling from the same judge he was now attacking. So what was left to fight over? That is what makes the scene so revealing. He was battling a loss that had already happened, performing for an audience outside the courtroom that had no power to change what was happening inside. And somewhere beneath all the shouting, Trump may have finally realized that the usual strategy was no longer working.
It got so heated that less than an hour in, the judge called for a 15-minute recess in an attempt to cool things down. But when Trump came back, his attitude was unchanged. He called the attorney general a fraud and the entire trial a political witch hunt.
Because it's a scam.
When he was done testifying, he declared the day a win for him.
You saw what I had to say today, and it was very conclusive. Everything we did was absolutely right.
He may feel emboldened by bombshell new polls that show him beating President Biden in 2024.
He came back into that courtroom after the recess with absolutely nothing changed. Same aggressive tone, same attacks, same determination to pretend the legal reality around him had somehow disappeared. Calling the Attorney General corrupt and branding the entire proceeding a scam was not courtroom strategy. It was Donald Trump reverting to the only playbook he seems to trust: speak louder, attack harder, and hope repetition can overpower the facts. Then came the remarkable part. While the judge was carefully creating a record that could ultimately cost Trump an extraordinary amount of money, Trump walked outside and proclaimed the day a victory. Think about that sequence. The judge shuts him down. Proceedings pause because the confrontation becomes too intense. Trump returns, refuses to adjust, escalates again, and then tells the cameras he won. None of that was aimed at persuading the judge. It was theater for supporters watching from outside the courtroom, people who cannot erase the legal consequences being created inside. And with every unnecessary speech, every accusation, and every refusal to simply answer the question, Trump was adding more material to a record whose final price could be enormous.
Trump and his children have denied any wrongdoing. And while Trump just took the stand about an hour ago, the judge has already accused the former president of treating this appearance like a political rally. The judge has urged Trump's lawyers a number of times to control their client. Let's go right to NBC's Vaughn Hilliard outside the courthouse. Vaughn.
Hey, good morning, Jose. Donald Trump just leaving here the courtroom for a morning break after a contentious first 90 minutes of Donald Trump on the stand and under oath, facing questions from the New York Attorney General's prosecution. But for Donald Trump, much of this was included interjections from the judge, Judge Engoron, who already has fined him twice for violating a gag order for attacking a member of his staff. But for this instance of Donald Trump on the stand, it was condemnation for the judge for giving, in his words, a political rally and speeches and not answering the actual questions from the New York Attorney General's prosecutor. At one point, the judge ordered Donald Trump's own attorney, Chris Kise, and Alina Habba to sit down after both were making the case that Donald Trump is free to answer the questions as he sees fit, that this is, in their words, an unusual circumstance to have the former president of the United States and, in the words of Chris Kise, the future president of the United States on the stand answering questions under oath, and that he should be able to build the narrative that he sees fit. Donald Trump on the stand called this an unfair trial and suggested that he was being politically targeted, which again was met with condemnation by the judge, who at multiple times had suggested that Chris Kise, his attorney, should pull his client aside and talk with him because he needed to answer the questions put forward by the New York Attorney General's office.
This was the moment the entire performance started to crack. Not when Trump got louder and not when he complained that the trial was unfair. The real turning point came when his own attorneys were ordered to sit down in open court. Chris Kise and Alina Habba, the lawyers whose job was to defend him and keep the situation under control, suddenly looked powerless as the judge cut them off in front of everyone. And every time Trump launched into another speech, he dragged his legal team deeper into the confrontation. The judge was not intimidated, and he made that obvious. What unfolded was less a coordinated defense than a public loss of control. Trump has spent years demanding unquestioned loyalty from everyone around him, yet here he could not even prevent his own lawyers from being reprimanded because of his behavior. The courtroom was no longer operating on fear, deference, or celebrity. His attorneys understood that reality. Trump seemed determined not to. And that shift changed the entire dynamic.
Yesterday, the defense team's own witness, a former Trump Organization executive named Jeffrey McConney, who is a co-defendant in the case, may have provided a direct link between the ex-president and the alleged exaggerations of the value of his properties. According to Business Insider, quote, McConney had been called to the witness stand by the defense, but on cross-examination by lawyers for the state attorney general's office Tuesday, he linked Trump firmly to the conspiracy and fraud counts that have yet to be decided in the non-jury trial. McConney was handed People's Exhibit 3054, a draft of Trump's net worth statement for 2014. He was asked to look at a note scribbled in thin blue ink on the draft's first page, DJT, to get final review, which he said he had written. The AG has alleged the net worth statement that McConney was handed the draft for from 2014 contained $3.5 billion in exaggerations. McConney also broke down in tears on the witness stand, saying that the mounting legal investigations led him to retire from the job.
This is the moment every Trump loyalist should be paying very close attention to, because the evidence causing the most damage did not come from the Attorney General or some outside political enemy. It came from inside Trump's own organization. Jeffrey McConney spent 35 years working in that business. He was a co-defendant, a longtime insider, exactly the kind of person Trump would normally expect to protect him. Instead, McConney helped put a handwritten note into the record that said, DJT to get final review. Then, under oath, he became emotional on the witness stand. Think about what that means. A system Trump built around loyalty, control, and silence ended up producing evidence that connected him directly to financial statements the state says contained billions in inflated values. And while a longtime employee was breaking down inside the courtroom, Trump was outside telling cameras he had won. At that point, the damage was not coming from his enemies. It was coming from his own people, his own records, and his own organization.
Joining our conversation, New York Times investigative reporter Suzanne Craig is back, and with me at the table, MSNBC legal analyst Lisa Rubin and New York Times editorial board member Mara Gay. Susan, how did Jeffrey McConney's testimony read to you?
I mean, it wasn't great. I think in a trial of not a lot of great days for Donald Trump and the Trump Organization. You know, there's a document that's out there. It's as you mentioned, the 2014 statements of financial condition, and right on the top of it, it says DJT to get final review, and it really does tie Trump to the document. We don't know if he got final review, but it shows there was some sort of acknowledgement in the organization that Donald Trump would sign off on these documents. And you know, Donald Trump has really tried to distance himself from this. He has said that he has an army of accountants and lawyers who look at these things. And I always think it's interesting with the Trump organization, you hear on the one hand, they're a mom and pop organization, very tightly run, you know, from the top down to the point where Donald Trump, up until the time he went to the White House, was signing every check that went out the door. But then you have, when it suits them, they're a large organization and they really don't get into the minutia of things like statements of financial conditions and audits. They rely on others. And the testimony from, I think, Jeff McConney yesterday really did tie the president, at least in some way, the former president in some way, to the financial statements. And that, you know, is significant.
Well, I want to ask you, Lisa, about that. According to Business Insider, the spreadsheet czar had testified on direct examination Monday that he would review each year's draft net worth statement with former Trump Organization CFO Alan Weisselberg, who would then give the approved draft to the outside accounting firm Mazars USA, which would print the final statement. Quote, I believe there was a step in between that involved Donald Trump prior to 2017, state lawyer Andrews said to McConney, who appeared uncomfortable on the stand as he said Trump indeed did the ultimate signing off. McConney's many handwritten notes indicate it was Trump and his top executives who made the last edits and then signed off on these net worth statements. As such, the notes do serious damage to the primary Trump defense. Blame Mazars, blame the accountants. Is this a direct link?
I think it is a direct link, but you don't even need this document, McConney's testimony, to get the direct link because Donald Trump himself gave it to us on November 6th. He was on the stand with Andrew Raymer, who also did the examination yesterday, and he said, is it correct that you had reviewed the statements of financial condition in each of the years from 2011 to 2017 before it became final? And Donald Trump's answer, and I'm reading to you from the transcript, Alicia, is, yeah, I would look at them. So you had it from the horse's mouth. You didn't need Jeff McConney and his handwriting and the Attorney General confronting him with things that put sort of a wrench in the narrative about blame it on Mazars. Donald Trump was willing to admit it himself when he took the stand.
And yet, when we talk about Trump's legal team and the choices that they make, it is noteworthy that they chose, this was their witness. Right. This was their witness who then added, perhaps they did not need it, but added more data points to suggest that Donald Trump indeed knew what he was doing.
Well, one of the other interesting things about the Trump organization, and this was true in the White House as well, is that we know that Donald Trump chose people around him who were sometimes competent but always loyal. And so, you know, what we're seeing here is that even with a bevy of lawyers whose sole purpose was to protect Donald Trump, whether or not something illegal was going on, there were mistakes made. And in a way, the more cooks you have in a shop, the more complicated that becomes. So the very people who he hired thinking they're going to protect me, they're going to prevent me from putting my own name at risk, actually now may have kind of sealed his fate. And so I do think it makes a difference, at least to the public, to see, you know, Donald Trump to get final approval on this. I mean, it's true. We've heard it out of his mouth. We've seen it. There's a trail there. But there's something that feels different about putting it in writing because Donald Trump is known for never putting anything in writing. And here it is, plain as day at the top of the document.
Sometimes competent, always loyal, definitely belongs on a mug or on a T-shirt. Susan, I want to read this to you, too, from Business Insider. Quote, in one key cautionary note from the 2015 draft, McConney made a notation in ink that this computation also includes forecasted deals that have not signed.